Picture this. A 40-year-old woman sits in her Honda Civic in a Walmart parking lot at 2 in the morning, crying as she counts $37 in crumpled bills. She's been living in that car for 3 weeks, showering at a 24-hour gym, and eating nothing but peanut butter sandwiches. 10 years later, that same woman would be standing in the marble lobby of her own office building, overseeing a real estate empire worth over $50 million. What happened next changed everything, and by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly how Sarah Mitchell went from sleeping in her car to owning more than 200 rental properties across Texas. This isn't just a story about real estate. It's about what happens when life strips away everything you thought you knew about yourself and forces you to discover who you really are underneath. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell had always believed in the American dream. Born in 1973 in a small town outside Fort Worth, Texas, she grew up watching her father work double shifts at the local manufacturing plant while her mother cleaned houses during the day and took in sewing at night. By the time Sarah turned 18, she had learned 2 fundamental truths that would shape her entire worldview. Hard work eventually pays off, and you can trust the people you love. These beliefs carried her through community college, where she earned an associate degree in business administration, and into her first job as a receptionist at a dental office in Arlington. At 25, Sarah met David Mitchell at a barbecue hosted by her coworker. David was 32, charming in that easy Texas way that made everyone feel like his best friend. He worked in construction, drove a pickup truck that sparkled in the sunlight, and had a laugh that could fill an entire room. When he told Sarah she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, she believed him completely. When he promised to take care of her for the rest of their lives, she trusted that too. They married 8 months later in a small ceremony at her childhood church, surrounded by family and friends who all agreed they'd never seen 2 people more perfect for each other. The early years of their marriage unfolded exactly as Sarah had imagined they would. David's construction business grew steadily, and Sarah advanced from receptionist to office manager at the dental practice. They bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood in Arlington, complete with a white picket fence and a small garden where Sarah planted tomatoes and sunflowers every spring. David would come home covered in dust and debris, shower off the day's work, and join Sarah on the back porch where they'd share a beer and plan their future. They talked about children, about maybe expanding the house, about the vacation to Colorado they'd take once they saved enough money. By the time Sarah turned 35, their life had settled into a comfortable routine that felt as natural as breathing. Every morning at 6:30, she'd wake up and make coffee while David showered. They'd eat breakfast together while watching the local news, discussing their plans for the day. Sarah would drive her reliable Honda Civic to the dental office, where she now managed a staff of 12 and handled all the practice's finances. David would head out in his truck to whatever job site demanded his attention, whether it was a new housing development or a commercial renovation project. Evenings were for home-cooked meals, reruns of their favorite shows, and the kind of easy conversation that comes with 15 years of marriage. What Sarah didn't know was that during those same comfortable years, David had developed a relationship with something that would ultimately destroy everything they'd built together. It started innocently enough, with occasional trips to the Native American casino about an hour outside Dallas. David would tell Sarah he was meeting clients there for dinner, or that he was networking with other contractors who did business at the casino's restaurants. Sarah never questioned these explanations because she had no reason to doubt her husband of 15 years. But what began as occasional networking dinners gradually evolved into something much more dangerous. David discovered poker, and poker discovered David's weaknesses with surgical precision. The thrill of a good hand, the rush of bluffing successfully, the intoxicating possibility that the next card could change everything. These sensations became as essential to David as food or sleep. What started as $100 buy-ins grew to $1,000 stakes, then $10,000 tournaments. David told himself he was investing in their future, that his winnings would pay for the dream vacation to Colorado, maybe even allow them to upgrade to a bigger house in a better neighborhood. The problem with gambling, of course, is that the house always wins in the end. And David's story was no exception to this fundamental rule of probability. By Sarah's 40th birthday, David owed more money to more dangerous people than Sarah could have imagined in her worst nightmares. The construction business that had once provided a steady income was being drained systematically to cover gambling debts. The man who had promised to take care of Sarah forever was drowning in an ocean of his own making. And he couldn't bring himself to tell the woman he loved that he was about to drag her down with him. Instead of confessing his problem and asking for help, David made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Without Sarah's knowledge or consent, he took out a second mortgage on their home. Using the equity they'd built over 15 years as collateral for loans that he promised himself he'd repay with his next big win. When that money disappeared into the poker rooms and slot machines, David took out a third mortgage, then a fourth. Each time, he forged Sarah's signature on documents she never saw, convinced that his next trip to the casino would solve all their problems. The morning that would shatter Sarah's world started like any other Tuesday in March 2013. She woke up at 6:30, made coffee, and called out to David to hurry up or he'd be late for the job site. When he didn't answer, she walked to the bathroom and found a note taped to the mirror. In David's familiar handwriting, it simply said, "Sarah, I'm sorry. I can't face what I've done. The house is gone. Everything is gone. Don't try to find me." Below his signature, he'd written the phone number for a bankruptcy attorney and the name of the bank that now owned their home. Sarah stood in that bathroom for 23 minutes, reading and rereading those 4 sentences, waiting for them to make sense. "Don't try to find me. The house is gone. Everything is gone." The words seemed to float in front of her eyes like something from a foreign language she'd never learned to speak. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be her life. This had to be some kind of mistake, some terrible misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a few phone calls. If you're finding value in this story of incredible transformation, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps me continue sharing these powerful stories of resilience and success. And I'm curious, have you ever experienced a moment when your entire world changed in an instant? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The phone calls Sarah made that Tuesday morning painted a picture so devastating that her mind simply refused to accept it as reality. The bankruptcy attorney, a tired-sounding man named Robert Chen, confirmed what the note had suggested, but what Sarah's heart couldn't process. David had accumulated gambling debts totaling over $400,000. To cover these debts, he'd taken out multiple mortgages on their home without her knowledge, forging her signature on documents that legally bound her to financial obligations she'd never agreed to take on. The house where Sarah had planted sunflowers every spring for 15 years was scheduled for foreclosure in 30 days. The checking account she'd assumed contained their life savings had been emptied 3 weeks earlier. The credit cards in her name had been maxed out and were already in default. The retirement account they'd been building since their wedding day had been liquidated to pay gambling debts to people whose names she'd never heard. In the span of one phone call, Sarah learned that the life she'd been living was an elaborate fiction, and the man she'd trusted with everything had left her to face the consequences alone. Robert Chen's voice carried the weary compassion of someone who'd delivered similar news too many times. "Mrs. Mitchell, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to talk about your options. You can file for bankruptcy, which will protect you from most of the debt your husband accumulated. But the foreclosure will proceed regardless. The bank has every legal right to take the house." Sarah found herself asking questions she'd never imagined needing to ask. Could she get a loan to save the house? Not with her current debt-to-income ratio. Could she sell the house before foreclosure? Not when she owed more on the mortgages than the house was worth. Could she find David and force him to fix this mess? Mr. Chen's silence told her everything. She needed to know about that option. The dental practice where Sarah had worked for 15 years became her sanctuary. During those first horrible weeks, Dr. Patricia Reeves, the practice owner, had always treated Sarah more like a business partner than an employee. When Sarah finally found the courage to explain her situation, Dr. Reeves immediately offered solutions. Sarah could work extra hours, take on additional responsibilities, maybe even buy into the practice as a partner once she got back on her feet. These offers came from genuine kindness, But Sarah quickly realized that even doubling her income wouldn't be enough to save the house or eliminate the debt David had created. The foreclosure process moved forward with the mechanical precision of legal machinery. Sarah received official notices in the mail every few days, each one stamped with red ink that seemed to scream at her from across the kitchen table. Notice of default, notice of trustee sale, notice of right to cure. She consulted with 3 different attorneys, hoping one of them might find a loophole that could save her home. Each consultation ended the same way: polite sympathy, followed by practical advice to prepare for the inevitable. During this period, Sarah discovered aspects of her own character that she'd never been forced to access. The woman who had always relied on David to handle their finances suddenly found herself learning about mortgage law, bankruptcy proceedings, and debt consolidation. She spent her evenings after work reading legal documents and financial advice websites, trying to understand how her stable, predictable life had become so complicated so quickly. The neighbors who had shared 15 years of holiday barbecues and borrowed lawnmowers began treating Sarah differently. Once word of the foreclosure spread through the subdivision, some offered genuine support, bringing casseroles and offering spare bedrooms. Others seemed to view her situation as contagious, as if whatever had happened to the Mitchells might somehow spread to their own marriages and mortgages. Sarah learned to tell the difference between real concern and morbid curiosity, filing away these lessons about human nature for future reference. 3 weeks before the foreclosure sale, Sarah made a decision that would have seemed impossible 2 months earlier. She would not declare bankruptcy. The debt David had created wasn't her fault, but it was now her responsibility. Bankruptcy would clear the slate, but it would also mean accepting defeat before she'd even begun to fight. Instead, Sarah chose a path that terrified and energized her in equal measure. She would let the foreclosure happen, but she would use the experience to learn everything she could about real estate, about how banks made these decisions, about how properties moved from owned to lost to sold again. The day of the foreclosure sale, Sarah drove to the county courthouse and stood in the back of the crowd that had gathered for the auction. She watched as her home, the place where she'd shared 15 years of marriage and built what she thought was a lifetime of memories, was sold to the highest bidder for $63,000 less than David owed on it. The winning bidder was a man in his 50s wearing a crisp white shirt and cowboy boots, who paid with a cashier's check he pulled from his jacket pocket. After the auction, Sarah approached the man who had just bought her former life. His name was Marcus Rodriguez, and he owned a company that specialized in buying foreclosed properties, fixing them up, and either selling or renting them. Sarah expected to feel anger or resentment toward the man who now owned her home, but instead she found herself fascinated by his process. How did he know which properties to bid on? How did he calculate what they were worth? How did he turn other people's disasters into his own success? Marcus was surprisingly willing to talk. He explained that foreclosure auctions were just one part of a much larger real estate ecosystem that most people never saw. Banks wanted to get rid of foreclosed properties as quickly as possible. Homeowners facing foreclosure were often desperate to sell before the auction. Investors with cash could buy properties below market value, invest in repairs and improvements, and create value for both themselves and the next occupants. It wasn't about taking advantage of people's misfortune, Marcus insisted. It was about finding opportunity in situations where everyone involved could benefit. As Sarah listened to Marcus explain his business model, she felt something she hadn't experienced since finding David's note: excitement about the future. This wasn't just a job or a career path. This was a way of thinking about problems that turned disasters into opportunities. Marcus was doing exactly what Sarah needed to learn how to do, taking situations that looked hopeless and finding ways to make them profitable. But first, Sarah had to survive losing everything she thought she owned. The week after the foreclosure sale, she packed everything that mattered into her Honda Civic and prepared to begin a new chapter of her life that she couldn't yet imagine. The woman who had planted sunflowers every spring was about to learn what it meant to grow something from nothing. The first night Sarah Mitchell slept in her car, she kept thinking about the movies she'd seen where people lived in their vehicles. In those movies, car dwelling always looked vaguely romantic, like an adventure chosen by free spirits who valued experience over possessions. The reality, Sarah discovered, was nothing like the movies. The Honda Civic that had served her faithfully for 8 years as transportation became a cramped, uncomfortable, utterly inadequate shelter that smelled like the fast food she'd eaten for dinner and echoed with every sound from the 24-hour Walmart parking lot where she'd decided to spend the night. Sarah had chosen this particular Walmart because the employee she'd spoken to inside had assured her that overnight parking was allowed, and because the location offered everything she needed within walking distance: public restrooms, cheap food, and the kind of anonymous busyness that would help her blend in. What the employee hadn't mentioned was that Walmart parking lots at 2 in the morning attracted a variety of people living in their vehicles, and most of them had been at it much longer than Sarah's first night. The woman parked 3 spaces over had been living in a converted van for 14 months, ever since losing her apartment when her disability payments were reduced. The man in the pickup truck was a long-haul trucker who slept in parking lots between jobs because he couldn't afford both truck payments and rent. The elderly couple in the RV were traveling the country on Social Security because their retirement savings had been wiped out by medical bills. Sarah listened to their stories with a mixture of compassion and terror, realizing she'd joined a community she'd never known existed: sleep. When it finally came, lasted about 3 hours and was interrupted by every car door slam, every shopping cart rattle, and every conversation between night shift employees taking smoke breaks. Sarah woke up at dawn with a stiff neck, a sore back, and the dawning realization that this wasn't temporary. She had no family close enough to help, no friends with spare bedrooms they could offer indefinitely, and no savings to rent even the cheapest apartment. The life she'd built over 40 years had been reduced to whatever fit in a compact car, and she had no clear path forward. The practical challenges of car living revealed themselves throughout that first week. Where do you shower when you don't have a home? Sarah discovered that a membership to a 24-hour gym cost $39 per month and provided not just shower facilities, but a place to store toiletries, change clothes, and maintain some semblance of the daily routine that had once defined her existence. Where do you do laundry? The laundromat near the gym became another regular stop, though Sarah quickly learned to buy only clothes that could be washed together and dried quickly. Where do you get mail when you don't have an address? The post office offered a solution in the form of a P.O. box, but that cost money Sarah couldn't spare. Instead, she arranged for her mail to be delivered to the dental practice where she worked, explaining to Dr. Reeves that she was temporarily between residences. Where do you cook food when you don't have a kitchen? Sarah's diet consisted mainly of foods that didn't require preparation: peanut butter sandwiches, bananas, crackers, canned soup she ate cold straight from the container. But if you think that the logistics of homelessness were Sarah's biggest challenge during those first weeks, you'd be underestimating the psychological impact of losing not just a home, but an entire identity. Sarah Mitchell had always been a homeowner, a wife, a woman with roots in her community, and a clear sense of where she belonged in the world. Now she was a 40-year-old woman sleeping in a car, showering at a gym, and trying to maintain professional competence at work while living in a way that felt completely incompatible with everything she'd ever believed about herself. The shame was overwhelming. Not shame about David's gambling or the foreclosure, because those weren't her choices. The shame came from the gap between how she appeared during the day and how she lived at night. At work, Sarah wore clean clothes, styled her hair, and managed the dental practice with the same competence she'd always demonstrated. Patients and coworkers saw the same reliable, professional woman they'd known for years. But underneath that carefully maintained exterior, Sarah felt like a fraud, like someone pretending to belong in the normal world while secretly living on its margins. The dental practice became more than just Sarah's workplace during this period. It became her anchor to the person she'd always been, the only place where she could still access the version of herself that made sense. Dr. Reeves, sensing that Sarah was struggling with more than just the foreclosure, began offering additional responsibilities that came with additional pay. Sarah could stay late to handle insurance claims, come in early to prepare for complex procedures, take on bookkeeping tasks for Dr. Reeves's other business interests. These extra duties provided both additional income and legitimate reasons to spend more time at the office, reducing the hours she had to face her new reality. After 3 weeks of sleeping in the Honda Civic, Sarah finally broke down and told Dr. Reeves the complete truth about her situation. The conversation took place after hours in Dr. Reeves's private office, and Sarah had intended to simply ask for an advance on her salary. Instead, the whole story tumbled out. David's abandonment, the forged mortgages, the foreclosure, the car, the Walmart parking lot, the 24-hour gym membership that was eating up money she couldn't afford to spend. Dr. Reeves listened without interruption, and when Sarah finished talking, she made an offer that probably saved Sarah's life. "There's a small apartment above the practice that we use for storage," Dr. Reeves said. "It's not much, just a studio with a bathroom and a kitchenette. But if you're willing to clean it out and handle some building maintenance responsibilities, you could live there rent-free for a while. Consider it part of your compensation." The apartment above the dental practice consisted of 400 square feet that had been used to store old equipment and files for the past 5 years. Sarah spent her first weekend there clearing out decades' worth of accumulated junk, scrubbing years of neglect from the bathroom and kitchenette, and trying to turn the space into something that resembled a home. She bought a futon from a thrift store, hung curtains she sewed herself from fabric remnants, and created a living space that was sparse but clean and entirely hers. For the first time in a month, Sarah slept through the night. She woke up in a real bed, in a space that belonged to her, with access to a private bathroom and a kitchen where she could prepare actual meals. The apartment wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't permanent, but it represented something Sarah had begun to think she might never have again: stability and privacy, and the dignity that comes with having a door you can close against the world. Living above the dental practice also provided Sarah with something unexpected: time. When your home is also your workplace, the commute disappears, and Sarah suddenly found herself with hours each day that she'd previously spent driving back and forth between her house and the office. She used this time to begin researching the real estate investment strategies that Marcus Rodriguez had mentioned at the foreclosure auction. The public library became her university, and books about real estate investing became her curriculum. Sarah checked out every book the library system offered on real estate investment: property management, house flipping, and rental property ownership. She read about buy and hold strategies, fix and flip techniques, wholesaling contracts, and tax lien investing. She learned about cash flow analysis, market comparable studies, and the 1% rule that suggested rental properties should generate monthly income equal to at least 1% of the purchase price. She discovered online forums where investors shared success stories and failure analysis. And she began to understand that real estate investing wasn't just about buying and selling properties. It was about understanding markets, managing cash flow, and finding value in situations that other people overlooked. But what really captured Sarah's attention was the realization that her own foreclosure experience had given her firsthand knowledge of a process that most real estate investors only understood theoretically. She had lived through every stage of the foreclosure process, from the first missed payment to the courthouse auction. She understood how overwhelming the experience was for homeowners, how much they didn't know about their options, and how desperate they became as the foreclosure date approached. This knowledge, Sarah realized, was incredibly valuable in a business where success often depended on finding motivated sellers. After 6 months of research, Sarah felt ready to take her first concrete step toward becoming a real estate investor. She had saved $3,000 from her work at the dental practice, not enough to buy property, but enough to start building the foundation for a real estate business. She used $500 to attend a weekend real estate investment seminar in Dallas, where she met dozens of people who were making money from real estate in ways she'd never imagined. The seminar taught Sarah about wholesaling, a strategy that involved finding deeply discounted properties and assigning the purchase contracts to other investors for a fee. Wholesaling required very little money up front, but it demanded excellent networking skills and the ability to recognize valuable properties quickly. Sarah also learned about private money lending, where investors with cash could earn high returns by lending money to house flippers and property developers. Both strategies seemed perfectly suited to someone with Sarah's situation: limited capital, but unlimited motivation to succeed. But if you thought Sarah's education would proceed smoothly from this point forward, you'd be wrong. Because real estate investing, like most businesses that promise high returns, is full of people ready to take advantage of beginners who don't yet know how to protect themselves from predatory practices and fraudulent schemes. Sarah's first attempt at real estate investing was a disaster that nearly convinced her to abandon the entire idea of building wealth through property ownership. It started with what seemed like a perfect opportunity, a foreclosed house in South Dallas that was listed for $15,000 on the courthouse auction website. Sarah had been studying the foreclosure listings for months, learning to read the cryptic legal descriptions and calculate potential values based on comparable sales in each neighborhood. This particular property, a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house built in 1978, should have been worth at least $60,000 based on recent sales of similar homes. Within a 5-block radius, the auction was scheduled for the first Tuesday in November, and Sarah had saved $4,500 to use as a down payment if she won the bidding. She'd spent the previous weekend driving through the neighborhood, taking photographs of the exterior and talking to neighbors about the property's condition and history. Everything seemed to check out. The house needed cosmetic work but appeared structurally sound. The neighborhood was stable and showed signs of gradual improvement. The price seemed too good to be true, but Sarah's research suggested that foreclosure auctions sometimes produced exactly these kinds of opportunities. What Sarah didn't know was that the property came with a hidden problem that would cost her every dollar she'd saved and teach her lessons about due diligence that no real estate seminar had ever mentioned. The house had been condemned by the city 6 months earlier due to severe foundation problems that would cost at least $30,000 to repair. The previous owners had tried to hide the foundation issues with cosmetic patches that made the problems invisible to casual inspection, but a professional engineer would have spotted the structural damage immediately. Sarah won the auction with a bid of $16,500. Using all of her savings for the down payment and agreeing to pay the balance within 30 days. She felt triumphant walking away from the courthouse that Tuesday morning, convinced that she'd just taken the first major step toward building a real estate empire. The feeling lasted exactly 4 days, until the structural engineer she'd hired to do a pre-repair inspection delivered news that made her physically sick. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm sorry to tell you this, but this house is basically uninhabitable," the engineer, a soft-spoken man named James Park, explained as they stood in what had once been the living room. "The foundation has shifted so severely that the entire structure is compromised. You'd have to completely rebuild the foundation, which means essentially tearing down the house and starting over. Even if you did that, there's no guarantee the city would lift the condemnation order. My professional opinion is that this property has negative value. You'd be better off walking away and losing your down payment than trying to fix these problems." The next 3 weeks were the darkest period of Sarah's entire adult life. She had put every dollar she'd saved toward a property that was not only worthless, but would actually cost her more money if she followed through with the purchase. If she walked away, she'd lose the $4,500 down payment, money that had taken her 8 months of working extra hours and living as cheaply as possible to accumulate. If she completed the purchase, she'd owe the full $16,500 for a property she could never legally rent or sell in its current condition. Sarah tried everything she could think of to salvage the situation. She contacted the city's building department to ask about the possibility of getting the condemnation order lifted. She got quotes from 3 different foundation repair companies. She consulted with an attorney who specialized in real estate transactions. Every conversation produced the same result. The property was unsalvageable, and Sarah's options ranged from bad to catastrophic. The stress of the situation began affecting every aspect of Sarah's life. She couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate at work, and found herself snapping at patients and coworkers over minor issues that would normally never have bothered her. Dr. Reeves noticed the change in Sarah's behavior and eventually convinced her to explain what was happening. When Sarah described the foundation problems and the financial bind she'd gotten herself into, Dr. Reeves offered to lend her the money to complete the purchase and then help her find a way to dispose of the property. But Sarah refused the offer. Taking on debt to buy a worthless property seemed like exactly the kind of thinking that had gotten David into trouble with gambling. Sarah had to face the consequences of her own poor decision-making, even if it meant starting over from zero. She walked away from the property, forfeiting her down payment, and tried to figure out how to rebuild both her savings account and her confidence in her ability to succeed as a real estate investor. The failure was devastating, but it was also educational in ways that success never could have been. Sarah learned that due diligence meant much more than driving through a neighborhood and looking at comparable sales. She learned that some opportunities that seemed too good to be true actually were too good to be true. She learned that real estate investing was a business where a single mistake could wipe out months of progress, and where success required not just courage and determination, but also knowledge and experience that could only be gained through years of careful study and practice. During this period, Sarah seriously considered giving up on real estate investing entirely and focusing instead on advancing her career at the dental practice. Dr. Reeves had mentioned the possibility of Sarah eventually buying into the practice as a partner, which would provide security and professional growth without the risks that came with real estate speculation. For someone who had already lost one home to foreclosure and $4,500 to a bad investment decision, the safe path held obvious appeal. But something Marcus Rodriguez had said at the foreclosure auction kept echoing in Sarah's mind during those dark weeks after walking away from the condemned property. Every successful real estate investor has a story about the deal that taught them how much they didn't know, Marcus had told her during their brief conversation. The investors who succeed are the ones who learn from those disasters and use the education to make better decisions the next time. Sarah realized that her experience with the condemned house, as painful as it had been financially, had taught her more about real estate investing than 6 months of reading books and attending seminars. She now understood the importance of professional inspections, city record searches, and title research. She'd learned to recognize the warning signs that indicated a property might have hidden problems that weren't immediately visible. Most importantly, she'd learned that real estate investing was a business where you had to be prepared for setbacks, because they were inevitable for anyone who stayed in the business long enough. Instead of abandoning real estate investing, Sarah decided to approach it more systematically. She would spend the next year rebuilding her savings while continuing to study the market. But she wouldn't make another purchase until she had enough knowledge and capital to handle whatever surprises might emerge. She also decided to focus on a different investment strategy, one that would allow her to learn from other people's expertise while building her own experience gradually. Sarah began attending the monthly meetings of the North, Texas Real Estate Investors Association, where experienced investors shared strategies and beginners could find mentors willing to teach them the business. At her third meeting, she met a woman named Diana Foster, who had been buying and rehabilitating rental properties in Dallas for 12 years. Diana offered Sarah a partnership arrangement. Sarah would provide sweat equity by helping with property management and tenant relations, while Diana would provide the capital and experience needed to identify and purchase good investment properties. The partnership with Diana represented a completely different approach to real estate investing than Sarah's first disastrous solo attempt. Instead of trying to learn everything at once and risking everything she had on properties she didn't fully understand, Sarah would work alongside an experienced investor who could teach her the business while minimizing her financial risk. Diana would handle the property purchases and major repairs, while Sarah would learn about tenant screening, lease agreements, maintenance coordination, and all the day-to-day activities that determine whether rental properties generate positive cash flow. But even this more conservative approach would test Sarah's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. Because real estate investing, she was about to discover, was as much about managing relationships with difficult people as it was about finding good properties at reasonable prices. And Sarah's education in human nature was just beginning. The lowest point came on a Friday evening in February, exactly 2 years after David had left the note on the bathroom mirror. Sarah was sitting in the small apartment above the dental practice, looking at her bank statement and trying to figure out how she'd managed to save so little money, despite working 60 hours a week for the past year. Between the money she'd lost on the condemned house, the ongoing expenses of living in Dallas, and the small amounts she'd invested in her real estate education, her savings account contained exactly $837. She found herself wondering if David had felt this same sense of hopelessness before he'd started gambling. Not that gambling was the answer to anything, but Sarah could understand the appeal of believing that one lucky break could solve all your problems instantly. Real estate investing was supposed to be her path to financial independence, but after 2 years of study and one expensive mistake, she was no closer to owning rental properties than she'd been the day she'd watched her own home sold at auction. That night, Sarah made a list of everything she'd learned during her 2 years of studying real estate investing. The list filled 3 pages with detailed information about market analysis, property evaluation, financing options, legal requirements, and tax implications. Looking at that list, Sarah realized something important. She might not have any money, but she had acquired knowledge that most people didn't possess. She understood how the real estate market worked, how to identify undervalued properties, and how to avoid the mistakes that trapped inexperienced investors. What she needed wasn't more education. What she needed was a way to turn her knowledge into income while she continued building the capital necessary to start buying properties. And that realization would lead to the breakthrough that changed everything. The idea that would transform Sarah's life came from an unexpected source: a conversation with a frustrated homeowner in the dental practice waiting room. Mrs. Elena Vasquez was sitting in the chair next to Sarah's desk, filling out paperwork for her routine cleaning appointment, when she mentioned that she'd been trying to sell her house for 8 months without success. The house was in a decent neighborhood in East Dallas, priced reasonably according to her real estate agent, but somehow couldn't attract any serious offers. Sarah's ears perked up immediately. After 2 years of studying real estate investing, she'd developed an instinct for recognizing situations where her knowledge might be valuable. She asked Mrs. Vasquez a few polite questions about her house and quickly identified the problem. The property was listed by an agent who specialized in luxury homes and didn't understand how to market a modestly priced house in a working-class neighborhood. The listing photos were terrible. The property description emphasized the wrong features, and the asking price was slightly too high for the local market conditions. Mrs. Vasquez, "I've been studying real estate as a hobby," Sarah said carefully, not wanting to overstep professional boundaries while she was at work. "Would you mind if I took a look at your listing online and maybe offered some suggestions? I might be able to help you figure out why the house isn't selling." Mrs. Vasquez was desperate enough to accept help from anyone, and Sarah spent her lunch break that day analyzing the property listing with the detailed eye she'd developed through months of studying comparable sales. The problems were obvious to someone who understood the local market. The asking price was $3,000 too high. The listing photos made the house look dark and cramped. The description focused on features that didn't matter to potential buyers in that price range while ignoring the property's actual selling points. Sarah wrote up her analysis in a 2-page report that explained exactly why the house wasn't selling and provided specific recommendations for fixing each problem. She suggested a new asking price based on recent comparable sales, identified which rooms should be rephotographed and how to stage them more effectively, and rewrote the property description to emphasize the features that would appeal to likely buyers in that neighborhood. Mrs. Vasquez implemented every one of Sarah's suggestions. The house sold within 3 weeks, and Mrs. Vasquez was so grateful that she insisted on paying Sarah a $500 consulting fee. More importantly, Mrs. Vasquez told her neighbors, co-workers, and family members about the woman at the dental office who had helped her sell her house after 8 months of frustration. Within 2 months, Sarah had helped 3 more homeowners analyze their property listings and develop more effective selling strategies. Word spread through the networks of people who had received her help, and Sarah realized she'd accidentally discovered a service that people desperately needed and were willing to pay for. Homeowners who couldn't sell their properties were often dealing with financial stress, family pressure, and the kind of desperation that made them grateful for knowledgeable assistance from someone they trusted. But what happened next changed everything. Sarah realized that the same analytical skills she was using to help homeowners sell their properties could be applied in reverse to help investors find undervalued properties before they hit the open market. Instead of waiting for good deals to appear at courthouse auctions or in MLS listings, Sarah could identify distressed homeowners who needed to sell quickly and connect them with investors who could close fast with cash offers. This revelation came during a conversation with Diana Foster at their monthly partnership meeting. Sarah had been describing her growing consulting business when Diana interrupted with obvious excitement. "Sarah, do you realize what you're doing? You're finding motivated sellers, the holy grail of real estate investing. Every investor in Dallas would pay you a finder's fee for connecting them with homeowners who need to sell quickly below market value." The concept was elegantly simple. Sarah would use her analytical skills to identify properties that were likely to sell below market value due to the owner's circumstances. Then connect those homeowners with investors who could provide quick cash transactions. She wouldn't need any money of her own to get started. And she'd earn finder's fees that could range from $1,000 to $5,000 per transaction, depending on the property value and the investor's profit margin. Sarah spent the next month developing a systematic approach to finding distressed properties and motivated sellers. She learned to recognize the warning signs that indicated a homeowner might be facing foreclosure: properties with overgrown lawns and minor exterior damage, mail piling up at houses where people obviously still lived, and neighborhood gossip about families experiencing financial difficulties. She also developed relationships with divorce attorneys, bankruptcy lawyers, and estate planning specialists who occasionally had clients who needed to sell property quickly. Her first successful transaction came in May 2015, exactly 2 years after losing her own home to foreclosure. Sarah had identified a property in Oak Cliff where the elderly owner had moved to an assisted living facility and was struggling to maintain the house while paying for his medical care. The man's daughter lived in Houston and was trying to manage the situation long distance, but she was overwhelmed by the complexity of preparing the house for sale while dealing with her father's health problems. Sarah approached the daughter with a proposition. Instead of going through the lengthy process of hiring a real estate agent and preparing the house for the retail market, she could connect them with an investor who would buy the property as is within 2 weeks. The investor would handle all the paperwork, pay cash at closing, and eliminate the stress and uncertainty of waiting for a traditional buyer to secure financing. The daughter was initially skeptical, but when Sarah explained that her investor partners were legitimate business people who could provide references and proof of funds, she agreed to consider the option. Sarah connected her with Marcus Rodriguez, the same investor who had bought Sarah's foreclosed home 2 years earlier. Marcus offered $68,000 for a property that would have sold for approximately $85,000 on the retail market after repairs and improvements. The family accepted the offer, grateful to close the chapter on their father's house without the stress and expense of preparing it for market. Marcus paid Sarah a $3,000 finder's fee for bringing him the deal, and Sarah realized she'd just earned more money in one transaction than she typically made in 2 months at the dental practice. More importantly, she'd helped a family solve a difficult problem while providing an investor with a profitable opportunity. But if you thought Sarah would be satisfied with earning finder's fees for other people's real estate investments, you'd be underestimating her ambition. The transaction with Marcus had shown her exactly how real estate investing worked from the inside, and she was determined to become an investor herself rather than just a middleman who helped other people build wealth. Sarah began saving every dollar she earned from her finder's fee business. But she also started looking for ways to get into real estate investing without the large amounts of capital that traditional property purchases required. She learned about a strategy called subject to investing, where investors could take control of properties by taking over the existing mortgage payments without formally assuming the loan. She also discovered lease option agreements that allowed investors to control properties with minimal upfront investment while building equity over time. The strategy that ultimately launched Sarah's investing career was called wholesaling contracts, a technique she'd learned about at the real estate seminars but had never fully understood until she started working with motivated sellers. Instead of finding properties for other investors, Sarah could put properties under contract herself and then assign those contracts to investors for assignment fees that were typically much larger than finder's fees. Her first wholesale transaction involved a property in South Dallas where the owner was facing foreclosure in 30 days. Sarah negotiated a purchase contract for $45,000, knowing that investors would pay at least $55,000 for the property once it was renovated. Instead of assigning the contract to another investor, Sarah decided to try something ambitious. She would find a private money lender who could provide the capital for her to actually purchase and renovate the property herself. This decision represented a fundamental shift in Sarah's approach to real estate investing. Instead of being a service provider who helped other people make money from property transactions, she was positioning herself to be the investor who captured the largest profit from each deal. It was riskier than wholesaling or finding deals for other investors, but the potential returns were much higher. Sarah found her private money lender through Diana Foster, who introduced her to a retired engineer named Robert Kim, who had been lending money to real estate investors for 8 years. Robert typically charged 12% annual interest plus 2 points up front, which seemed expensive until Sarah calculated that she could still make a substantial profit even after paying his fees. The numbers on Sarah's first fix and flip project looked compelling on paper. She could buy the property for $45,000, invest $15,000 in renovations, and sell it for $75,000, generating a gross profit of $15,000 before expenses. After paying Robert's lending fees, holding costs, and renovation expenses, Sarah projected a net profit of approximately $8,000 for 3 months of work. The renovation took 4 months instead of 3, cost $22,000 instead of $15,000, and the property ultimately sold for $71,000 instead of $75,000. Sarah's actual profit was $3,400, less than half of what she'd projected, but still more money than she'd ever earned from a single transaction. More importantly, she'd proven to herself that she could successfully manage a real estate investment project from start to finish. That first modest success was the foundation for everything that followed. Sarah had demonstrated that she could find undervalued properties, arrange financing, manage renovations, and sell properties for a profit. She had the knowledge, the skills, and now the track record necessary to build a real estate investment business. What she needed next was a system for scaling her, operations, and a strategy for building the kind of wealth that would make her financially independent. The breakthrough came when Sarah realized that instead of flipping houses for one-time profits, she should be buying rental properties that would generate monthly cash flow indefinitely. The fix and flip strategy was essentially trading time and expertise for money, which meant her income was limited by the number of projects she could handle personally. Rental property ownership, on the other hand, was a way to build wealth that would continue growing even when Sarah wasn't actively working. Sarah's first rental property purchase happened in October 2015, 18 months after she'd started her finder's fee business and 6 months after her successful house flip. The property was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in Lancaster, Texas, that she bought for $52,000. Using a combination of private money from Robert Kim and a conventional mortgage that required a 20% down payment, the house needed $8,000 worth of improvements to bring it up to rental standards. But Sarah was able to rent it for $950 per month once the work was completed. After making the mortgage payment, insurance, taxes, and setting aside money for maintenance reserves, the property generated positive cash flow of approximately $200 per month. $200 per month might not sound like much, but Sarah understood the power of that seemingly modest amount. The property was generating $2,400 per year in passive income while also appreciating in value and providing tax benefits through depreciation deductions. Even more importantly, the rental income was helping Sarah build the credit history and income documentation that would allow her to qualify for additional investment property loans. Within 6 months of buying her first rental property, Sarah had purchased 2 more houses using the same strategy. She was now generating approximately $600 per month in rental income while working full-time at the dental practice and continuing to earn money from her wholesaling and finder's fee activities. For the first time since David had abandoned her, Sarah felt like she was building something sustainable that would provide long-term financial security. But the most important thing that happened during this period wasn't financial. It was psychological. Sarah realized that she'd completely transformed her relationship with money, risk, and her own capabilities. 3 years earlier, she'd been a woman who had never made a major financial decision without her husband's input. Now she was analyzing property values, negotiating with contractors, managing tenants, and building a business that was creating wealth in multiple ways, simultaneously. The woman who had once planted sunflowers in her backyard was now planting seeds of a different kind, investments, that would grow into financial independence, and the kind of security that no one could take away from her. But Sarah's story was just getting started, because what she'd accomplished so far was nothing compared to what she was about to achieve. By the end of 2016, Sarah Mitchell owned 7 rental properties across the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and was generating over $3,000 per month in passive income from her real estate investments. But the numbers only told part of the story. The woman who had once lived in her car was now running a sophisticated real estate investment operation that included property acquisition, renovation management, tenant relations, and financial planning components that most small business owners would have envied. Sarah's typical day began at 5:30 in the morning, 2 hours before she needed to be at the dental practice. She used this time to review property listings, analyze potential investments, communicate with contractors working on renovation projects, and handle tenant issues that required her personal attention. The small apartment above Dr. Reeves's office had been transformed into a command center with filing systems for each property, spreadsheets tracking income and expenses, and a communication system that allowed Sarah to manage her growing business efficiently. The dental practice remained Sarah's primary source of income and health insurance. But Dr. Reeves had become more than just an employer. She was now a business mentor who understood exactly what Sarah was trying to accomplish and actively supported her real estate investing activities. When Sarah needed time off to handle property closings or meet with contractors, Dr. Reeves adjusted the schedule without complaint. When Sarah needed references for bank loans, Dr. Reeves provided detailed letters documenting Sarah's reliability and work ethic. But what really accelerated Sarah's progress was her decision to systematize every aspect of her real estate investment process. Instead of handling each property acquisition as a unique transaction, Sarah developed standardized procedures for finding deals, analyzing properties, arranging financing, managing renovations, and screening tenants. This systematization allowed her to handle more transactions with less stress while reducing the chance of costly mistakes. Sarah's property acquisition system was built around the relationships she'd developed with wholesalers, real estate agents, and other investors who brought her deals that met her specific criteria. She was looking for properties priced between $40,000 and $80,000 in neighborhoods with strong rental demand and low crime rates. The properties needed to be structurally sound but cosmetically distressed, which meant she could add value through improvements while avoiding the kind of foundation problems that had cost her money on her first attempted purchase. Her renovation management system was based on relationships with 3 general contractors who understood her quality standards and budget requirements. Sarah had learned that managing contractors was as much about clear communication and realistic expectations as it was about technical knowledge. She provided detailed specifications for every project, required written estimates for all work, and maintained strict payment schedules that incentivized timely completion without creating cash flow problems for her contractors. Sarah's tenant screening process was perhaps the most important system she developed, because rental property success ultimately depends on finding reliable tenants who pay rent on time and take care of the properties. Sarah required all potential tenants to meet minimum income requirements, pass credit and criminal background checks, and provide references from previous landlords. She also personally interviewed every applicant to assess their communication skills and general reliability. The financial management system Sarah developed tracked every dollar of income and expense across her entire portfolio, allowing her to calculate the precise return on investment for each property and identify opportunities for improvement. She maintained separate bank accounts for each property to simplify bookkeeping and tax preparation, and she set aside a percentage of rental income each month for maintenance reserves, vacancy allowances, and capital improvements. By early 2017, Sarah's systematized approach was generating consistent results that validated her decision to focus on rental property ownership rather than house flipping. Her 7 properties were producing an average monthly cash flow of $430 each, and the portfolio's total value had increased by approximately 15% over the previous year. Sarah was building wealth through cash flow, appreciation, and mortgage principal reduction, while gaining valuable experience that would allow her to scale her operations even further. But if you thought Sarah's success would continue in a straight line from this point forward, you'd be underestimating the challenges that come with rapid business growth. Because managing 7 rental properties was completely different from managing 2 or 3, and Sarah was about to discover that success in real estate investing creates problems that failure never does. The first major challenge came in the form of tenant management issues that tested every system Sarah had developed. In March 2017, Sarah received calls from tenants in 3 different properties on the same day, each reporting problems that required immediate attention. One property had a plumbing leak that was causing water damage to hardwood floors. Another had an air conditioning system that had stopped working during an unusually warm spring week. The third had tenants who were complaining about neighbors who were apparently dealing drugs from their front yard. Sarah spent the entire day driving between properties, coordinating with contractors, communicating with tenants, and trying to solve problems that seemed to multiply as fast as she could address them. By the end of the day, she'd spent over $800 on emergency repairs and had scheduled additional work that would cost at least $1,500 more. She also realized that her part-time approach to property management wasn't sustainable as her portfolio continued to grow. The solution came from an unexpected source. One of Sarah's tenants was a recently retired teacher named Margaret Chen, who had excellent organizational skills and was looking for part-time work that would supplement her pension income. Sarah offered Margaret a position as her property management assistant, handling routine maintenance coordination, tenant communication, and rent collection activities that were consuming increasingly large amounts of Sarah's time. Margaret's involvement transformed Sarah's business operations in ways that went far beyond simple time management. As a former teacher, Margaret had natural authority and communication skills that made her extremely effective at handling tenant issues diplomatically but firmly. She also brought a level of detailed record-keeping that improved Sarah's financial tracking and legal compliance significantly. Within 6 months, Margaret was essentially running the day-to-day operations of Sarah's property management activities while Sarah focused on acquisition and strategic planning. The partnership with Margaret freed Sarah to pursue more ambitious growth strategies. Instead of limiting herself to 1 or 2 property purchases per year, Sarah began actively seeking opportunities to acquire multiple properties through portfolio purchases, estate sales, and relationships with other investors who were looking to liquidate parts of their holdings. Her goal was to own 25 rental properties by the end of 2018, which would generate enough passive income to allow her to leave the dental practice and focus on real estate investing full-time. Sarah's first major portfolio acquisition came in September 2017, when she had the opportunity to buy 6 rental properties from an investor who was moving out of state and wanted to liquidate his Dallas holdings quickly. The properties were all located within a 15-minute drive of each other, which would make management more efficient, and they were already rented to tenants who had good payment histories. The seller was asking $280,000 for properties that Sarah estimated were worth at least $320,000. Individually, the challenge was arranging financing for such a large purchase. Traditional mortgage lenders typically limit investors to 4 financed rental properties, which meant Sarah couldn't use conventional financing for the entire portfolio. Instead, she structured the deal using a combination of private money from Robert Kim, seller financing from the property owner, and cash that she'd accumulated from her rental income and wholesaling profits. The transaction required Sarah to coordinate with 3 different lenders, 2 attorneys, a title company, and multiple insurance agents. all while ensuring that the existing tenants understood what was happening and wouldn't be disrupted by the ownership change. It was the most complex business transaction Sarah had ever attempted, and there were several moments when she wasn't sure she'd be able to pull everything together by the closing date. But the deal closed successfully, and Sarah suddenly owned 13 rental properties with a combined value of over $600,000. Her monthly rental income increased from approximately $3,000 to over $7,000, which was more than she earned from her full-time job at the dental practice. For the first time since David had left, Sarah felt like she had achieved true financial security, income that didn't depend on her ability to work 40 hours per week in assets that would continue appreciating in value even during economic downturns. The success of the portfolio acquisition convinced Sarah that she was ready to scale her operations even more aggressively. Instead of buying individual properties one at a time, she began looking for opportunities to acquire large numbers of rental units through relationships with other investors, real estate agents who specialized in investment properties, and companies that were liquidating rental property portfolios. Sarah's networking activities expanded to include monthly meetings with real estate investment groups in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston. She began attending national real estate conferences where she could learn about investment strategies being used successfully in other markets. She also started building relationships with commercial lenders who could provide the kind of large-scale financing that would allow her to purchase apartment buildings and other multi-unit properties. By the beginning of 2018, Sarah had developed a 5-year plan that would establish her as one of the largest individual rental property owners in North Texas. Her goal was to own 100 rental units by 2023, generating monthly cash flow of at least $25,000 and building a net worth that exceeded $5 million. It was an ambitious plan for someone who had been homeless just 5 years earlier, but Sarah's track record suggested that she had the knowledge, skills, and determination necessary to achieve those goals. The plan required Sarah to transition from small residential properties to larger multi-unit buildings that would provide more rental income per transaction. It also required her to develop new skills in commercial real estate analysis, property management at scale, and the kind of sophisticated financing arrangements that multi-million-dollar real estate investments demanded. Sarah's first apartment building purchase took place in June 2018, a 12-unit complex in Garland, Texas, that she bought for $450,000 using a commercial loan that required a 30% down payment. The building was fully occupied and generating monthly rental income of approximately $6,000, but it needed significant capital improvements that would allow Sarah to increase rents and improve the property's long-term value. Managing a 12-unit apartment building was completely different from managing individual rental houses scattered across the Metroplex. Sarah had to learn about commercial property management, bulk purchasing of maintenance supplies, and the specialized insurance requirements that applied to multifamily properties. She also had to develop new relationships with contractors who could handle larger-scale renovation projects efficiently. But the apartment building also provided Sarah with her first experience of what truly passive income could look like. Unlike individual rental houses that might have vacancy periods between tenants, the 12-unit building maintained consistent occupancy rates above 90%. The concentrated location made maintenance and management much more efficient than Sarah's scattered portfolio of individual properties. Most importantly, the building's value appreciated much faster than individual houses, providing Sarah with equity growth that accelerated her wealth building significantly. By the end of 2018, Sarah Mitchell owned 28 rental properties, including 2 apartment buildings, and was generating over $15,000 per month in rental income. Her net worth had grown to approximately $2 million, and she was well ahead of schedule on her 5-year plan to build a multi-million-dollar real estate investment portfolio. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't financial. It was personal. The woman who had once questioned every major decision and deferred to her husband's judgment was now making multi-$100,000 investment decisions with confidence and expertise that impressed seasoned real estate professionals. Sarah had discovered capabilities she'd never known she possessed. And she was just getting started on what would become one of the most dramatic, wealth-building success stories in Texas real estate investing history. As Sarah Mitchell stood in the marble lobby of the 40-story office building she had just purchased in downtown Dallas, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment in March 2023. Exactly 10 years after finding David's note on the bathroom mirror, Sarah now owned over 200 rental properties across Texas, employed 15 full-time staff members, and had built a real estate investment company with assets exceeding $50 million. The transformation from a homeless woman sleeping in her car to one of the most successful real estate investors in North Texas represented more than just financial achievement. It was proof of what becomes possible when someone refuses to accept defeat as permanent. The numbers were staggering by any measure. Sarah's rental property portfolio generated over $120,000 per month in gross rental income. Her company, Mitchell Property Investments, managed properties for other investors, in addition to her own holdings, creating multiple revenue streams that had made her financially independent beyond anything she could have imagined during those desperate nights in the Walmart parking lot. The woman who had once counted $37 in crumpled bills now had a net worth that placed her among the wealthiest self-made women in Texas. But Sarah's story was about much more than money. It was about the discovery that adversity, when approached with the right mindset, becomes the foundation for extraordinary achievement. Every challenge Sarah had faced, the foreclosure, the homelessness, the failed first investment, the complex property acquisitions, had taught her lessons that became essential to her eventual success. The knowledge she'd gained from losing, everything had made her a more skilled investor than she ever could have become if her life had proceeded smoothly. The foreclosure that had seemed like the end of Sarah's world in 2013 had actually been the beginning of her education in real estate investing. Living in her car had taught her resilience and resourcefulness that served her well during the inevitable difficulties that come with building any business. The condemned house that had cost her $4,500 had provided lessons about due diligence that had saved her hundreds of thousands of dollars on subsequent investments. Every setback had contributed to her eventual success in ways that weren't apparent at the time. Sarah's success also demonstrated the power of systematic thinking and continuous learning. Instead of relying on luck or intuition, Sarah had approached real estate investing as a skill that could be developed through study, practice, and careful analysis. She had read hundreds of books, attended dozens of seminars, and learned from the experience of successful investors who were willing to share their knowledge. Most importantly, she had developed systems and procedures that allowed her to scale her operations while maintaining quality and minimizing risk. The relationships Sarah had built throughout her journey were just as important as the properties she'd acquired. Margaret Chen, who had started as Sarah's part-time property management assistant, was now the general manager of Mitchell Property Investments and owned a small equity stake in the company. Dr. Patricia Reeves remained a close friend and informal business advisor, and she had invested in several of Sarah's apartment building projects. Marcus Rodriguez, the investor who had bought Sarah's foreclosed home, had become a joint venture partner on multiple large-scale real estate developments. These relationships highlighted one of the most important lessons from Sarah's story. Success in real estate investing, like success in most businesses, depends heavily on your ability to build trust and create value for other people. Sarah's finder's fee business had worked because she helped homeowners solve difficult problems. Her rental properties were successful because she provided quality housing and responsive management to her tenants. Her investment partnerships thrived because she delivered consistent returns to her financial partners. Sarah's transformation, from victim to victor, also illustrated the importance of taking responsibility for your own outcomes, regardless of the circumstances that create your challenges. David's gambling addiction and abandonment had created Sarah's initial crisis, but Sarah's response to that crisis had determined her ultimate destiny. She could have declared bankruptcy, accepted government assistance, and blamed her situation on her husband's choices. Instead, she had chosen to view the crisis as an opportunity to build the kind of life she wanted, independent of anyone else's decisions or actions. The mindset that had enabled Sarah's success could be summarized in 3 fundamental principles that anyone facing adversity could apply to their own situation. First, every problem contains the seeds of opportunity for those who are willing to look for solutions rather than focusing on blame or self-pity. Sarah's foreclosure experience had taught her about real estate investing in ways that classroom education never could have. Second, knowledge and skills can be acquired by anyone who is willing to invest the time and effort required for mastery. Sarah had no background in real estate when she started, but she had educated herself systematically until she understood the business better than most professionals. Third, success requires action despite uncertainty and risk. Sarah had made many mistakes during her journey, but she had learned from each failure and continued moving forward toward her goals. Perhaps the most inspiring aspect of Sarah's story was how she had used her success to help other people overcome similar challenges. Mitchell Property Investments now offered rent-to-own programs that helped families with poor credit histories work toward home ownership. Sarah had also started a nonprofit organization that provided financial literacy education and microloans to women facing divorce, bankruptcy, or other financial crises. She regularly spoke at real estate investment meetings, sharing her story and teaching the strategies that had enabled her success. Sarah's journey from homelessness to wealth had taken exactly 10 years, but the lessons she'd learned would benefit others for generations. The systems she'd developed for finding, analyzing, and managing rental properties had been documented in training materials that she shared freely with beginning investors. The relationships she'd built with lenders, contractors, and property management professionals had created a network that helped other investors succeed more quickly and with fewer mistakes than they could have managed on their own. Standing in that marble lobby in downtown Dallas, Sarah thought about the woman she'd been 10 years earlier, crying in a Honda Civic and wondering if she'd ever feel secure again. That woman could never have imagined the life Sarah was living now, but she'd possessed something that had made this transformation possible: the courage to keep going when everything seemed hopeless, and the wisdom to learn from every experience, whether positive or negative. The most important message from Sarah's story wasn't about real estate investing specifically. It was about the incredible potential that exists within every person, regardless of their current circumstances. Age, education, background, and resources matter much less than mindset, persistence, and the willingness to take responsibility for creating the life you want. Sarah had started her real estate investing journey at age 40 with no money, no experience, and no support system. 10 years later, she had built wealth that most people only dream about. But more importantly, she had discovered capabilities and strengths that had been inside her all along. Sarah Mitchell's transformation from homeless at 40 to real estate mogul at 50 proves that it's never too late to completely reinvent your life, and that the greatest opportunities often emerge from the most challenging circumstances. Her story reminds us that success isn't about avoiding failure. It's about learning from failure and using that education to create something better than what you had before. Whether you're facing foreclosure, divorce, job loss, or any other life crisis, Sarah's example shows that those challenges can become the foundation for achievements you never thought possible. The woman who once planted sunflowers in her backyard had learned to plant something much more valuable: investments that would grow into financial freedom and the kind of security that no one could take away. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had planted seeds of inspiration that would help countless others discover their own potential for transformation and success. If Sarah's story has resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you won't miss future stories of incredible transformations. Please give this video a thumbs up if it inspired you, and share it with someone who might need to hear Sarah's message of hope and possibility. I'm curious to know, what's the biggest challenge you've overcome in your own life? And how did that experience change you? Share your story in the comments below. Your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, every expert was once a beginner, and every success story started with someone who refused to give up when things looked impossible. Your transformation might be just one decision away.